your guardian, founder of the Lanterns. May I ask you a question? I know exactly why me.
Lanterns, Episode 3, arrives on August 30th under the title OutKast, and the most important thing every fan needs to understand before watching it is what Sinestro said to Hal Jordan in the final minutes of Episode 2. He did not warn Hal about the Manhunters. He did not warn him about the shape-shifting alien hiding somewhere in Rushville, Nebraska, capable of wearing any face in that town. Sinestro told his former pupil that John Stewart is a bigger threat to the Green Lantern legend than the Manhunters are. That statement, delivered by a character whose entire mythology in DC Comics is built on the corruption of an ideal he once served better than anyone, is the most consequential line spoken in this series so far, and Episode 3 is the episode that has to begin explaining why it might be true. Does John's demonstrated ability to sustain a construct without wearing the ring, a feat that visibly shocked Hal Jordan and that breaks a fundamental rule of how Green Lantern power is supposed to function, connect to whatever Sinestro sees in him? What does the Episode 3 preview's opening image of John Stewart falling through a skylight actually depict, and is it the test that Hal referenced in the opening minutes of the pilot? Who is the character Laura Linney plays, and why does John meet her in an episode titled OutKast? What does it mean that John Stewart Sr., the Marine father who shot an apple off his son's head to teach him fearlessness, is shown in the preview shooting a television that is broadcasting news about a masked Green Lantern? And if HBO's own spoiler materials confirm that Episode 3 contains a flashback featuring John Stewart and one of the Guardians of the Universe, does that mean John's connection to the Corps predates the Ring choosing him? And does it mean the Corps already knew who he was? Every one of those questions has an answer, and this breakdown covers all of them. The single most important thing that happened in Episode 2 was not the Manhunter reveal, and it was not Hal Jordan getting shot and arrested for stealing bodies from the morgue. It was a bird. Hal handed John the ring and gave him a flying lesson consisting of exactly 2 words: "You fly." Because for Hal, who spent a career as a fighter pilot before Abin Sur's ring found him, flight is instinct rather than technique. John Stewart is not a pilot. He could not fly. What he could do, and what neither Hal nor the audience expected, was create a bird construct and then keep that construct alive after the ring left his hand. Hal sent John on a commercial flight to Coast City to retrieve the lantern battery and recharge the ring, and told him to keep the bird alive the entire time he was gone. John did, without the ring. However, unfortunately for every assumption the audience brought into this series about how Green Lantern power operates, that is not supposed to be possible. The ring is the conduit. The ring is what translates willpower into matter. A construct is not a thing the bearer creates and then releases into the world. It is a continuous act of will channeled through a specific piece of Guardian technology, and it collapses the moment the channel closes. John Stewart kept a bird alive across a continent without the channel. The evidence from Hal's visible shock at that moment tells the audience that this is not a training milestone. It is an anomaly. What makes the anomaly so significant is that Hal Jordan has been a Green Lantern since 1986, 40 years of experience with the ring, with the Corps, with the specific physics of how willpower becomes matter. He is not a man who would be surprised by a talented recruit doing something impressive. He would be surprised by a recruit doing something that his 40 years told him could not be done. The evidence from that specific reaction, shock rather than pride, alarm rather than encouragement, tells the audience that Hal understood immediately what the bird meant, and that whatever it meant frightened him enough that he said nothing about it in the moment. The evidence strongly suggests that Episode 3 is the episode where Hal has to decide whether to report what he saw to the Guardians, and that Sinestro's appearance at the end of Episode 2 was designed to arrive at exactly the moment when Hal was carrying that specific information alone. The most likely explanation for what John's ringless construct means connects directly to the image that closed the series premiere: John Stewart standing over Hal Jordan's frozen body in 2026, wearing no ring. That detail has been the show's most discussed unresolved mystery since episode 1 aired, and the assumption most fans arrived at was that John lost the ring, surrendered it, or had it taken from him in the decade between the two timelines. The evidence from episode 2 opens a considerably more disturbing possibility. If John Stewart can generate and sustain constructs without a ring, then his ringlessness in 2026 may not indicate that he stopped being a lantern. It may indicate that he stopped needing to be one. The most logical conclusion from what episode 2 demonstrated is that John's relationship to the power the core distributes is different in kind from every other lantern's. That whatever the ring does for Hal Jordan, John possesses some version of it independently, and that the ring for him has been functioning as a training tool rather than a power source. The evidence strongly suggests that Sinestro's warning to Hal is built on exactly this observation. A Green Lantern who does not require the Guardian's technology to access the Guardian's power is not simply a talented recruit. He is a demonstration that the entire architecture of core authority, the Guardians select, the Guardians distribute, the Guardians can revoke, has a loophole walking around inside it. However, unfortunately, that reading of Sinestro's warning makes his motives considerably more complicated than simple villainy. Hal Sinestro in DC Comics mythology is not a man who hates the Green Lantern Corps. He is a man who loved it so completely that when he concluded the Guardians were failing, he built a rival corps around fear because he believed fear enforced order more reliably than will. A Sinestro who tells Hal Jordan that John Stewart threatens the Green Lantern legend is not necessarily lying. He may be identifying a genuine structural vulnerability in an institution he still believes should exist. The most logical conclusion from that framing is that episode 3 gives the audience enough information about John Stewart to make Sinestro's assessment feel at least partially correct, and that the show's most sophisticated move is to make its villain's warning something the audience has to seriously consider rather than dismiss. The theory that OutKast is going to explore, and the reason the episode's title carries the weight it does, is the one about what John Stewart's history with the Corps actually is. HBO's own spoiler materials confirm that episode 3 contains a flashback scene featuring John Stewart and one of the Lantern Guardians, the blue-skinned immortals of Oea, who created the Corps, who selected Abin Sur, and who have overseen the distribution of the rings for billions of years. The evidence from that confirmed flashback is genuinely destabilizing for everything the show has established about John's origin. The pilot presented John as a man the ring found, a recruit selected by Abin Sur's ring after Hal Jordan's period as Earth's sole lantern. A flashback showing John with a Guardian suggests that relationship predates the selection, or complicates it, or means something other than what the audience assumed. However, unfortunately, the title OutKast makes the darkest reading of that flashback the most available one. An outcast is not someone who was never included. An outcast is someone who was cast out, someone who belonged and then was removed. If episode 3's Guardian flashback shows John Stewart being rejected, exiled, or deliberately excluded by the Corps at some earlier point in his life, then his eventual selection as a lantern is not a story about a worthy man being found. It is a story about someone the Guardians already know and already decided about, and the fact that a ring chose him anyway is the specific development that would make Sinestro consider him a threat to the Green Lantern legend. But the theory that carries the most emotional weight for what OutKast delivers is the one about John Stewart Sr., and the evidence from the episode 3 preview makes it the episode's clearest character through line. The pilot established the father in a single devastating sequence, a Marine who made his young son stand perfectly still while he shot an apple off his head, delivering the same lesson about fear that Hal Jordan was simultaneously delivering to a national television audience through his 60 Minutes interview. The preview for episode 3 contains a shot at the 17-second mark of John Stewart Sr. shooting a television that is broadcasting news about a masked Green Lantern. The evidence from that image is remarkably specific. The father is not indifferent to Green Lanterns. He is not skeptical of them. He hates them enough to destroy a television for showing one. The most logical conclusion from that hatred, placed in an episode about John's dark past, and his destiny with the Corps is that John Stewart Sr.'s relationship to the Green Lantern Corps is not the passive resentment of a man who distrusts authority. It is personal. The evidence strongly suggests that Episode 3 will reveal what the Corps did to John Stewart Sr., or what it failed to do for him, and that the answer reframes both the apple shooting sequence and John's eventual selection as a lantern into something considerably more complicated than a boy who grew up hard and became a hero anyway. The specific structure of the pilot's opening makes this reading almost unavoidable in retrospect. The show did not simply show John's father teaching him fearlessness. It showed the father doing so immediately after the family watched Hal Jordan explain fearlessness on national television. The apple was a response. John Stewart Sr. watched a Green Lantern tell America that fear no longer controlled him, and then took his son outside and demonstrated a version of the same lesson using a weapon and a child's head. The evidence from that sequencing tells the audience that the father was not competing with Hal Jordan abstractly. He was refusing something, refusing the version of courage that a man with an alien ring gets to describe from a television studio, refusing the idea that the lesson belongs to someone who acquired it through a gift rather than through the specific brutality of earning it. And the evidence from the Episode 3 preview, showing that same father destroying a television for broadcasting the same face, tells the audience that the refusal never softened. The character who enters the story in Episode 3 and who represents the largest unknown in the entire season is the one Laura Linney plays. Linney has not been given a character name in any of HBO's promotional materials. She appears in the cast list, her presence has been confirmed by multiple outlets, and the Episode 3 preview shows John Stewart meeting her. The evidence from Linney's career and from the way the show has deployed its supporting cast tells the audience that this is not a minor role. Laura Linney does not accept unnamed guest appearances in genre television. She takes roles with weight, with moral complexity, and with sufficient narrative importance to justify her involvement. However, unfortunately, the complete absence of information about who she plays makes her the season's most conspicuous secret. The evidence from the preview's specific placement of her meeting with John, in an episode about John's past, his father, and his relationship to the Corps, strongly suggests that Linney's character is connected to one of those three threads. She may be someone from John's history, someone from the institutional world of the Corps, or someone who represents the third position in a conflict the show has so far framed as being between the Lanterns and the Manhunters. The evidence from how Chris Mundy structured Ozark's most important secondary characters, always people who arrive looking like allies and reveal themselves as forces the protagonists cannot control, suggests Linney's role is the latter. What makes her introduction in OutKast, specifically, rather than in the pilot or in Episode 2, is the strongest available clue about her function. A character who enters the story in the episode dedicated to John Stewart's past, his father, and his relationship to the Guardians, is a character connected to at least one of those three things. The evidence from the preview showing John meeting her rather than Hal tells the audience that whatever she represents belongs to John's story rather than the Rushville investigation, and that the show is building a second narrative track parallel to the murder mystery rather than inside it. The secondary element of Episode 2 that Episode 3 has to address is Hal Jordan's legal situation. Hal was shot and arrested for trespassing and stealing bodies from the Rushville morgue, a sequence that Forbes critic Eric Kane described in his Episode 2 review as one of the episode's more consequential turns. That arrest matters for reasons that extend beyond plot mechanics. Hal Jordan is Earth's most publicly known superhero, a man who gave a 60 Minutes interview in 1996, explaining to the nation that the Green Lantern Corps exists and that he is a member of it. A publicly identified Green Lantern being arrested by a county sheriff's department in Nebraska for body theft is not a small event. It is the kind of thing that generates news coverage, institutional attention, and the specific category of scrutiny that a covert alien investigation cannot survive. The evidence from how the show has been building the tension between Hal's methods and Kerry Kane's jurisdiction suggests that Episode 3 will show the consequences of that arrest rippling outward. and that Hal's ability to continue investigating Rushville is now dependent on legal and institutional factors he cannot control with a ring. The context that makes all of this matter more than it otherwise would is the specific institutional position Lanterns now occupies inside the DC universe. The series pulled 9.3 million viewers across its first 3 days of release, making it DC's most-watched premiere ever. That number arrives after a summer in which Supergirl underperformed critically and commercially, and James Gunn faced public questions about whether the DCU's television strategy could deliver prestige-level results. Lanterns answered those questions in a single weekend. The evidence from that performance, combined with the show's 95% critical score, tells the audience that HBO and DC Studios have found something that works: a slower, more character-driven, more genuinely adult approach to superhero storytelling that the medium has largely abandoned in favor of spectacle. However, unfortunately, that success creates its own pressure. A show that opens at 9.3 million viewers with a 95% score has to sustain both across 8 weeks, and Episode 3, the John Stewart-focused character episode, the one that slows the investigation down to explore a backstory, is exactly the kind of episode that tests whether an audience that arrived for a murder mystery will stay for a character study. After everything Episode 2 delivered and everything the Episode 3 preview and confirmed HBO materials have revealed, the question every fan is carrying into August 30th is the one that Sinestro's warning made unavoidable. Lanterns Episode 3, OutKast, premieres Sunday, August 30th, 2026, at 9 p.m. Eastern and 6 p.m. Pacific on HBO, streaming simultaneously on HBO Max. International viewers can watch on Crave in Canada at the same time, on Sky Atlantic and Now TV in the UK at 2 p.m. BST on August 31st, and on Jio Hotstar in India at 6:30 a.m. EST on August 31st. The 8-episode season continues weekly, with Episode 4 on September 6th, Episode 5 on September 13th, Episode 6 on September 20th, Episode 7 on September 27th, and the finale on October 4th, 2026. Based on everything the preview shows and everything the season has established about the distance between where John Stewart begins and where he stands over Hal Jordan's body 10 years later, OutKast is the episode where the audience finds out what John Stewart is, and whether Sinestro's warning was manipulation, jealousy, or the most honest assessment anyone in this story has made. Now the conversation moves to the fans. 3 questions need answering before August 30th. John sustained a construct without wearing the ring, which should not be possible under any established rule of Green Lantern power. Does OutKast explain that ability as something John was born with, something the Guardians gave him before the ring, or something considerably more alarming that connects to why Sinestro considers him a threat to the Corps itself? John Stewart Sr. shot a television for showing a Green Lantern on the news. Does Episode 3 reveal that the Corps failed his family in some specific way, or is the father's hatred rooted in something more ideological about what it means to have alien police operating on Earth, with no accountability to anyone living on it? And the question that the episode title makes most urgent, if OutKast refers to John Stewart being cast out, rather than never having been included, who cast him out, when did it happen, and does the ring that found him in the pilot represent a second chance, or a mistake that someone on OFA is about to try to correct? The video on screen covers everything else fans need to know before Episode 3 finally drops this Sunday.